A top Chinese official now says Beijing has agreed to extend its tariff truce with the U.S.
When Donald Trump's trade team sat down with Chinese officials in Stockholm this July, they came with the full weight of the president's strategy behind them. Just weeks earlier, Trump had sealed deals with both the European Union and Japan, agreements that embodied his vision of bilateral pressure and reciprocal tariffs. Now, facing Beijing, his negotiators expected that momentum to continue. But what they encountered wasn't resistance in the traditional sense. There were no walkouts, no dramatic threats. Instead, China responded with something far more deliberate, a soft but firm refusal to play by Trump's rules. They didn't walk away from the table. They sat there, listened, conceded a little, and then quietly defended their long-term position. This wasn't a retreat. It was a calculated delay.
So I think anyone who buys sanctioned Russian oil should be ready for this. Is a bill that will give the president discretion to apply secondary tariffs on sanctioned Russian oil from, I believe it's from 0 to 500%.
What was their response to that warning?
The Chinese take their sovereignty very seriously. We don't want to impede on their sovereignty, so they'd like to pay a 100% tariff.
Washington came into the talks with a clear list of demands. The U.S. wanted China to cut its imports of sanctioned oil from Iran and Russia, commit to larger purchases of American goods, and reduce industrial overcapacity, particularly in sectors like steel and EVs. In return, the U.S. hinted it might delay or scale back planned tariffs. China, in response, lifted some of its restrictions on rare earth magnet exports, materials critical to U.S. defense and tech industries. But beyond that, Beijing made no promises. On oil, officials signaled they were prepared to absorb up to 100% tariffs if needed. On broader reforms, they kept their cards close. It was a clear message. China would give a little to buy time, but it would not concede its strategic posture. Rather than meet Trump head-on, Beijing chose to slow the pace. The two sides agreed in principle to extend their tariff truce, set to expire on August 12th, but no final deal was announced. U.S. officials confirmed that the pause still required Trump's personal approval. The message was subtle but powerful. China was willing to keep talking, as long as the terms didn't force them to restructure their economy on Washington's timeline. While the U.S. emphasized rebalancing trade and reshoring manufacturing, China remained focused on minimizing disruption. Instead of decoupling, they emphasized de-risking. And while Washington pushed for immediate commitments, Beijing focused on procedural cooperation, additional meetings, shared economic reports, and maintaining diplomatic space. This strategy gave China flexibility. It delayed confrontation and kept U.S. pressure in check without ceding too much ground.
And what's the biggest concession they've made?
That the Chinese have made? Well, I would say they blocked all of their rare earth magnets, and now we're getting them.
One of China's most powerful tools remains its dominance in rare earth supply. While it restored some flows of rare earth magnets to U.S. firms as a goodwill gesture, the underlying leverage remained. As of 2024, China accounted for over 90% of global rare earth refining capacity, according to data from the U.S. Geological Survey. That grip gives Beijing a built-in deterrent to any rapid escalation. Likewise, China's position on Iranian and Russian oil was deliberately firm. Instead of denying purchases, Chinese officials acknowledged the trade and accepted the possibility of penalties. In effect, they positioned themselves not as a violator, but as a sovereign actor willing to pay the price. This combination of partial cooperation and strategic firmness allowed China to hold its ground while avoiding the kind of direct conflict Trump's strategy often invites. Trump may have redrawn the map of global trade negotiations, but China isn't playing by the same map. At Stockholm, Beijing didn't fight loud. It fought long. Through limited concessions, strategic patience, and soft leverage, it resisted the core logic of Trump's deal-first model. While the White House sought fast results, China prepared for a longer game, one that tests whether Trump's system of pressure can withstand a counterpart who neither defies nor submits. In this round, there was no handshake, no headline deal. But beneath the surface, Beijing sent a clear signal. The rules may be changing, but they still get to choose when and how to respond.
Scott Moe says that there needs to be increased cooperation with China. A news release that you guys had issued yesterday said that there needs to be a better working relationship on trade with China. That's specifically what the premiers were calling on the Prime Minister to do. So help me reconcile those two things. Is China the enemy, or do we work with China?
Premier Doug Ford didn't hold back. In the middle of one of the most uncertain trade climates in North American history, Ontario's premier stood before reporters and said the quiet part out loud: if Trump's tariffs continue, Canada may look east to China. This wasn't just a warning, it was a signal, a shift. One of Canada's most powerful provincial leaders openly floated the idea of deepening trade with Beijing, not Washington. And for the US, that could mean more than just a lost customer. It could mean a long-term strategic blow. So what happens if Canada actually pivots to China? Let's break it down. Since returning to the White House, President Trump has made tariffs the centerpiece of his trade agenda once again. His administration argues this is about fairness, making sure America isn't taken advantage of. But for Canada, these policies haven't brought clarity. They've brought volatility. Steel, aluminum, autos, and even softwood lumber have been hit. And now, a sweeping 35% tariff looms over all non-compliant Canadian goods starting August 1st. For business leaders across North America, this isn't a negotiation tactic. It's a threat that keeps shifting, and it's reshaping the foundation of what used to be the world's most stable trade partnership.
You know what Churchill said, our enemy of our enemy is our friend, and as long as China plays fair and doesn't undercut our markets, be it the auto sector or any sector, I have no problem dealing with them.
In response, Canada hasn't shouted, it's acted. Ottawa has quietly escalated its own tariffs on American steel and aluminum, matching the US increases. But more importantly, Canada is shifting focus. While there's still strong trade with the US, provincial leaders are building escape routes, pipelines, new export lanes, and diversified partnerships. That includes China. Ontario alone conducts over $43 billion in two-way trade with China, according to provincial figures. Imports dominate that number, but Ford is clear. If the US continues to act unpredictably, Canada will work with whoever plays fair, and that includes China. Even as Ford emphasizes protecting Canada's auto sector from Chinese EVs, his message is unmistakable. Canada is no longer beholden to the United States. We've already seen the signs. Canadian brewers are sourcing aluminum cans from China, not the US, due to skyrocketing prices from Trump's tariffs. RBC reports that as of June 2025, nearly 90% of Canadian exports entering the US are now fully USMCA compliant. A defensive move, proving Canadian businesses are adjusting supply chains to navigate around American uncertainty.
We buy about $349 billion of products. So Japan and the rest of the countries around the world have quite a bit to catch up to what we purchase off the US.
If Canada's pivot becomes permanent, the US will feel it in ways that go far beyond headlines. In 2024, Canada purchased $349 billion worth of American goods, more than Japan, Germany, and the UK combined. Losing even a portion of that trade to China would hit US manufacturers hard. Sectors like autos, machinery, agriculture, and energy rely on stable cross-border flows. If Canadian buyers shift orders to Chinese suppliers, the pain will be domestic, felt in states like Michigan, Ohio, and Pennsylvania. And it's not just about goods. Strategically, China has long sought to expand its influence in the Western Hemisphere. A deeper trade relationship with Canada would give Beijing more leverage in North America, something Washington has tried to avoid for decades. In trying to punish Canada, Trump may be pushing it into China's arms. Trump promised to win better trade deals. But tariffs have delivered something else: hesitation, retaliation, and uncertainty. Instead of pulling Canada closer, the White House is driving a wedge. A country that once stood as America's closest economic ally is now exploring other options, because it feels like it has to. Trump's tariffs were designed to protect American workers. But if those policies fracture trade relationships and push partners toward rival powers, then the damage may run far deeper than economic losses. In this new trade world, isolation isn't strength, it's a liability. And for the US, The question isn't whether tariffs backfire. It's how long we're willing to pretend they didn't.
Yesterday, President Trump criticized the BRICS for promoting anti-U.S. policy and threatened to impose 10% tariff hikes on them.
The BRICS are now emerging as really the only global forum that can stand up to Trump's trade war.
In the middle of an unfinished trade truce with China, President Trump has opened a new front. With his August 1st global tariff deadline approaching, he's now threatening to impose a 10% tariff on any nation that aligns with BRICS, the economic bloc led by China, alongside Brazil, Russia, India, and South Africa. It's a broad, blunt move, and while it's meant to box China in, it may be doing the opposite, because instead of lashing out, Beijing is choosing something more subtle and potentially more powerful. Back in June, President Trump declared that a trade deal with China was signed and sealed. But weeks later, no detailed agreement has surfaced. The only thing both sides confirmed was a temporary truce, a 90-day pause on escalating tariffs, set to expire in mid-August. Instead of focusing on finishing that deal, Trump has expanded the fight. On July 7th, he warned that any country linked to BRICS policies, including using non-dollar currencies, building alternative supply chains, or participating in infrastructure cooperation, could face new U.S. tariffs. This message directly impacts countries like India, Indonesia, and Brazil, nations that aren't anti-American but are part of BRICS Plus. It's a sweeping threat that risks alienating both rivals and strategic trade partners. And once again, Trump is using tariffs not just as economic leverage, but as a way to force countries to pick a side.
And threatened to impose 10% tariff hikes on them. What's your comment? BRICS is an important platform for cooperation among emerging markets and developing countries. Cooperation. It is not a bloc for confrontation, nor does it target any country. On the U.S. tariff hikes, China has made its position clear more than once. Trade war and tariff war have no winners, and protectionism leads nowhere.
China has not responded with counter tariffs. Instead, its foreign ministry chose careful, deliberate messaging. Beijing emphasized that BRICS is an open, cooperative platform, not a political alliance aimed at anyone. It said tariff wars have no winners, and that using trade as a weapon would backfire on everyone. At the same time, China is strengthening its position through diplomacy and long-term investment. Over the past month, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi held high-level meetings in France and Germany. The focus? Green energy, multilateral cooperation, and strengthening trade outside the dollar system. Projects like the Dabai nuclear plant, solar installations in Greece, and joint energy infrastructure in Germany are part of a wider push. It's Beijing's quiet answer to tariff pressure. Create more partners, not more enemies. Meanwhile, within BRICS, China is expanding local currency trade, but doing so without direct confrontation. Countries like India have clarified they're not abandoning the dollar, even as they conduct more rupee-yuan transactions. It's a strategic shift. Rather than escalate, China is reframing BRICS as a development-first bloc, winning sympathy from the global south, while Trump's threats grow broader and harder to enforce.
Makes sense. So it's very hard to make sense of Trump for companies. Companies cannot invest if they feel there is deep uncertainty about the future economic environment. And what Trump is doing, he's creating a lot of uncertainty, not only for companies, but also for countries.
Trump's tariff warning may look strong, but there are three big risks. First, it's vague. BRICS aligned isn't defined in law. It's unclear what level of cooperation triggers tariffs. And that uncertainty spooks markets. Second, it alienates neutral partners. India and Brazil both want trade with the US, China, and the EU. Threatening them for participating in multilateral groups pushes them closer to Beijing, not further away. Third, and most importantly, it gives China a messaging advantage. By staying calm, presenting itself as a responsible economic power, and avoiding retaliation, Beijing now looks like the adult in the room, especially to European and developing nations. And all this is happening while the US-China truce remains unresolved. If no final agreement is reached by mid-August, a new wave of tariffs could crash into already fragile supply chains. This isn't just another trade dispute, it's a deeper confrontation between two worldviews. Trump believes power comes from pressure, tariffs, deadlines, and demands. China, by contrast, is betting on patience, diplomacy, and building alliances one project at a time. But there's a risk in Trump's approach. In trying to isolate China, he may be isolating America. And by turning tariffs into a global loyalty test, he's forcing countries to rethink who they can trust. As the clock ticks toward August 1st, the question isn't whether China will retaliate. It's whether it even needs to.